So let's begin. We are proud to host tonight's discussion of Vines and Vision, the winemakers of Santa Barbara County, not only for the superlative images and words of this wonderful book, but because it was created by two local treasures and great friends of Chaucer's, renowned photographer MacDuff Everton and dedicated journalist Matt Kettmann. To introduce our speakers and to moderate this evening, I am pleased to introduce Greg Brewer. Originally a French instructor at UCSB, Greg founded his avocation 29 years ago while working at the Santa Barbara Winery. In 1996, he created his eponymous label, Brewer Clifton, with original partner Steve Clifton. While his efforts in the winemaking industry are too numerous to list, the entirety of his career has been rooted in the Santa Rita Hills appellation, which he helped to map, define, and establish in 1997. Recently, his work within that realm received widespread accolades when he was named by Wine Spectator magazine as its 2020 Winemaker of the Year. Congratulations to you, Greg, and thank you for leading tonight's discussion.
Thank you so much for having me. A huge, just sincere voice of gratitude to Chaucer's, everyone in attendance tonight. Thank you so much for devoting this time in your evening to an amazing, huge piece of work that we're going to celebrate tonight with two dear friends, amazing colleagues, and we're going to get kind of right into it. I'm going to keep the bios a little bit brief for them. They're readily available. They're in the book. They were in the presentation for tonight. So I'm really ravenous and desirous to get into the heart of this matter, to learn about the genesis of the book and kind of the evolution of things along the way. So I'm going to keep things kind of brief. But starting off with Matt Kettmann, a beautiful friend, journalist of decades, predominantly for the Santa Barbara Independent, as we all know, and of course now the Wine Enthusiast magazine, which in my career span has only gained in recognition and importance and just everything, nourishment of a publication. It's largely due to Matt's work, his diligent work, focusing predominantly on the Central Coast, for which we're all very, very, very appreciative, to really put our area in the limelight of the world. And then of course, MacDuff Everton, his career goes back decades and decades in photojournalism, multiple continents, contributing for more publications. And I mean, I've tried to remember and I've got them in my notes, but it's too much for me to keep track of. Huge, huge, huge career. And bringing a sensitivity to photojournalism, to the subjects that he captures, the landscape that he portrays. And really, we're in such beautiful hands tonight. And I can't wait to kind of learn more about what prompted this work, and really to get into it. So thank you both for joining me. And first and foremost, I have to say that here I am. I'm actually using a palette of your books as a podium for for this. Luckily, it still has the tarp on it, so if it gets really crazy and I spill, like, it's going to be okay. I won't ruin them. And I do admit, this glorious tome here, I'm about a third of the way through. When I first grabbed it, it's big. It's really big. And for this gentleman here who didn't quite make it all the way through grad school in French Lit, I was a little bit intimidated. And I have to say, like, it's such a pleasure to read this. It's so engaging that it's like, for me, it's like these little short stories and really inside snapshots of all these colleagues and the photos and the way you've broken it up and other articles to kind of break up all the producers. Really, I mean, it's so much more than just, oh, here's this beautiful book. It offers so much. And so thank you for the time and commitment that obviously took to make this happen. It's awesome. And it's heavy, so I'm gonna put it back on the palette. Now I'm gonna kind of jump through a little bit. You know, we all went to UCSB, which is awesome. MacDuff, a 5th generation Oregonian. Matt, the same in California. I'm more recent to the West Coast, but doing the best I can. And I love that your relationship, your professional relationship anyway, was sparked through the book on which you collaborated for the Lark. And then in the fall of 2017, you convened, I think, James Joyce, if memory serves. And it was kind of the seed or the genesis of this. I'd love to know, like, how that came about. Was it did you see a need in the local community to kind of capture and punctuate things? Was it a personal burning desire to create something like this? Talk to me.
I mean, I'll jump in and then let MacDuff tell his side of the story. But we worked together on that Lark book. I did the wine chapter, and I helped MacDuff with some other editing aspects of it. And I think he respected my work and my attention to detail when it came to that project. And so he said, let's go meet for a beer at the James Joyce. And so we had some Guinness, which actually we had yesterday while we were packing boxes all morning and afternoon. So we had a Guinness, and he said we should do a wine book together. And I said, yes, we should. I mean, I had been covering wine here really for almost 20 years, more intently the last, decade or a dozen years or so. Being in charge of the Central Coast for Wine Enthusiasts is a pretty big job. I'm reviewing a couple hundred wines a month. And so it was kind of like, and for me as a journalist, I've written chapters in other books, but I've never really written my own book. So it was a step I kind of wanted to make career-wise anyway. And so suddenly I had, this renowned photographer who I didn't really, we'd never, that was the first time we actually had met in person, was over that beer. We'd communicated via email and phone perhaps, but that was about it. And so now there's this renowned journalist who also has archival photos. So he's bringing additional value to the project. And I said, yeah, let's do it. I also thought, like an idiot, that it was going to be really easy, that I had actually written most of the chapters already, because I had written a lot about all these wineries that are in the book. But once I went to go back over those old articles, they were newspaper articles that some pieces made sense for book chapters, but it really had to be kind of re-reported and all of that. And so really the first step was kind of introducing MacDuff back into the wine scene. He had covered various people over the years, but he wasn't a big wine expert or anything like he is now. And so, I got to know MacDuff a little bit, and then quickly realized that he was going to be more interesting than most of the people he was going to go talk to anyway. So they were going to be fascinated with him. So he wasn't one of these, partners that you have to go kind of continuously manage and reintroduce to people all the time. It's like, I'll just set him on his way. I just gave him phone numbers and he was off. And, so by that next summer, he was shooting away. And then it took me a few more months to really kind of start revving up my engines. And MacDuff was also the pressure that I needed to have to finish something like this. I knew once we started that we were going to produce something. I don't do things really halfway. I like to do things completely and well if I'm going to put my name on it and dive into it. So that's my side of how we started. I don't know if MacDuff has a different perspective.
I'd love to hear yours. What was it that sparked your interest to do this?
It seemed like a no-brainer. Matt is so well respected in the Central Coast. And between us, we had, 40 years, 50 years of working in this area. And I didn't know anyone else who would bring so much to a collaboration like this. And when I started doing this, because Matt hadn't worked with me before, when I would photograph a place, if he had a story, if we had a chapter, I would start laying it out so he could see. And that became the whole template of how this book became was that each time he would write a chapter, I would lay it out, and it just sort of built incrementally. And I'd have to wait to see what he would write, because he might mention someone who I hadn't met before. Because it was because of my work as a photojournalist, I wanted these to be real shots of people working. And I didn't want to go and set something up. I wanted people in the harvest to be harvesting if they were in the winery. And sometimes that was difficult to convey, that I actually could work without getting in people's way.
Which you did beautifully, by the way, just from a subject point of view. You were calm, you were patient, and you took all the time in the world. You were so pro with everything, and you kind of just blended in, which a lot of people don't. So that's obviously a testament to how you operate. I love this notion of like call and response between the two of you. So when you said, you know, he would write the article and then your photos would kind of set things up, would it kind of teeter-totter back and forth, or was one kind of setting the tone for the direction of things, if that makes sense?
I mean, I think that, I mean, there's a couple ways. It wasn't always just that I wrote the chapter, and well, I'd have to write the chapter before he laid it out, but he was also shooting places before I was writing about them. And maybe I knew these people, but he was coming back with stories occasionally that I would then kind of, when I was re-interviewing people, kind of weave those into things too. So he was bringing some information to the table once he was out there talking to these people, as well as additional subjects. I mean, I knew most of these people, and I think we have a pretty, it's not an exhaustive book, not everybody's in there, but there's quite a few people in there, and I think we're pretty proud of the ones that we selected and the ones that kind of made it in. But there were a few that he ran into that I was like, oh yeah, you're right, we should include those, which happened a lot because that's why there's like 100 chapters. But you know, I also so there was a lot of kind of feedback back and forth between each other on moving this project forward, really.
Yeah, and that was it. Kind of brings me to the next question: is the scope of this? I mean, it's a massive undertaking. I can't even fathom what goes into making that happen. Did it swell up and become more grand over the course of time through the photos and writing, or did you kind of have a plan that this would be more or less it?
It's,
I mean, yeah, go ahead, MacDuff.
It started out, we planned to do maybe 20 or 30 winemakers, and 200 pages long. And then it was like, oh, wait, we can't leave this person out. Oh, wait, we can't leave this person out. And, you know, at a certain point, Mary said, has Matt added anybody else? and then we just decided, this is going to be the best book that's ever been done on this area. And why are we putting parameters on what we're doing? It should evolve. And I let Matt decide who we included, and then I would go out and photograph them. And it just kept evolving and getting larger and larger and larger. And I would call the printer and say, can we do 500 pages? Can we do 600 pages? Can we, you know, and even though it's the pounds and is 632 pages, it could have easily have been 800 pages, because there's so many stories that I'd say, Matt, did you know? And he said, you know, I'd hear a story and Matt said, yeah, I know, but how are we going to put that in? You know, that chapter is going to be 2,000 words long instead of, you know, we have to, you know, so we ended up putting parameters, but they kept changing.
Yeah. No, of course, that's awesome. And I would suspect, you know, from a producer's point of view, you know, when you receive an overture from people such as you for a work like this, it's immensely flattering, and I would suspect everyone would have embraced with open arms. Did you encounter anything that surprised you, either like crazy openness or hesitancy at all, or was everyone, you're both so trusted and beloved in this area, I would assume it was all cool. I'm just curious if you met any weirdness.
I don't think anybody envisioned that. Almost everybody that looks at the book has said, well, I thought you'd do a good job, but I never imagined it would be this good, which is a very backhanded compliment. But
I get it all the time.
I mean, I think that there wasn't any, I mean, most people were open to us coming. You know, winemakers are an interesting bunch of people, and their schedules are crazy and our schedules were crazy. So there were a few that took time to schedule and to get on the books, and I also think, you know, some are more media savvy, some are less media savvy. Most people appreciated immediately that we were going to show some extra attention to them. Mm-hmm. And then when I would talk to him on the phone, you know, we would talk for a long time, and when we originally started, to get back a little bit to your other question of like, did this like blow up on you? You know, I thought, oh, we could do like, you know, 200 word chapters. But then once I start writing a chapter, frankly, it's a lot harder to write a short chapter than it is to write the full chapter, because you feel like you're leaving so much on the cutting room floor. So I just started going for it. And it was There were a few chapters that are quite long, but most of them are in the 800 to 1200 word range, which feels about right. It's about the right amount of length to tell a personal story, to talk about where they stand in the wine world today, and that sort of thing. So we were already talking about people or wineries that we would add if we did a second edition and things like that. But I think for right now, we're pretty happy with how it all turned out.
Of course, yeah. I mean, as you should be. And with all, speaking of writing, and as you're referencing kind of word count, it makes me reflect on, being a journalist and kind of knowing in your head what your parameters are. It's almost like how big of a bottle you're going to fill. I mean, it seems very set. So with all the writing you've done, and MacDuff, with all the photography you've done, what if any elements of the Santa Barbara County wine area render it more unique, or like what are some of the things that really stand out to you that if someone were to ask you, God, what's that all about? Like, how is that different from another area? How would you respond?
I'll go first since I know the wine well and compared to other regions, and then MacDuff can go. But obviously we have, well, not obviously, maybe not to many of the viewers, but we have this extremely unique geography here, which is, if you've ever been to a tasting room in Santa Barbara, you've heard the story. So you've probably heard it 500 times, but basically we have the transverse range. So the whole coast opens on, the mountains open onto the ocean. That doesn't happen anywhere else in the West Coast of the Americas. So you have this ocean influence that comes directly in from the west, flies over Lompoc, flies over Santa Maria, and pushes into the valleys. So on the western edge of the valleys, you can grow what are considered cooler climate grapes like Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and to some extent Syrah. But then as you go deeper into the valley, you can grow warmer weather grapes like Cabernet and other grapes like that from the Bordeaux region and other even parts of Spain and Italy. And so you really can do, it sounds like a gimmick, but it's not. You really can do a variety of grapes here well. So there's that. And then there's what I get into in the intro, which to me, it is what sets Santa Barbara apart from many other regions that I cover, is that the vintners here remain very inquisitive and remain very kind of taken by the magic of and the mystery of the whole thing, right? So my intro kind of goes into this visit we did to Do Rita Vineyard, which is on the far west, actually west of the Santa Rita Hills, so presumably cooler climate than than it almost gets anywhere in this region. But then the grapes actually get ripe sooner sometimes than the ones that are to the east, so that's kind of an anomaly. And all of the vintners that day were like, yeah, we don't, they had theories, but they're like, we don't really know. And that's kind of the fun part, right? That's the fun part about wine. It's like, we don't know this. It's this blend of, kind of controlled nature and then human influence in the cellar, whether you're doing very low manipulation or very high manipulation, a human is involved, and you can't deny that. The grapes don't just become wine without a human. And so there's this combination of nature, human, there's history, there's geography, there's all this stuff. And I think that Santa Barbara vintners, for whatever reason, appreciate that a lot more so maybe than other regions that I've covered, where people are more like cocksure and confident about why something does well.
Yeah.
Here it's more like, we think it's this, but we don't know, and that's cool.
Yeah, cool. And MacDuff, from your standpoint, what kind of the physicality, the physical nature of things, like what are some of the attributes here that really resonate with you and that stand out amongst all the other things that you've captured in your life?
Well, first of all, one of the things that, and this isn't unique just to Santa Barbara County, but all the winemakers I consider them artists. And there's a passion in art. And I find this also with cooks, with good chefs, that they're so happy. They are in a job that they love, and they want to share that. And it becomes really interesting from my perspective, because the more I show interest in them, the more they want to show. And it leads into things that I wouldn't plan. When I would go to different wineries, I never planned on what I was going to shoot, other than if it was harvest. I knew a broad idea of what I would be photographing, but The other thing that was we were incredibly lucky on is that we had real good weather and rain at the end of 2017, 2018. So a lot of the photographs, there's clouds in the sky, and one of the cameras I use is a panoramic Noblex camera, which covers what your eye sees with peripheral vision, which is about 140, 150 degrees. And because I have to hold it parallel, I can't turn it up or down. I have to hold it level. Half the picture is the sky, and if it's this boring blue, it's not a very interesting picture. But if there's something going on, if there's clouds coming in, it makes it much more dramatic. It's like people say, usually their license, their driver's license photographs are very boring. It's just this flat light, and you can do the same thing with a landscape. It can be very boring, or it can add a depth of character. And I think that the clouds add that character to the landscape. And Santa Barbara County is a beautiful place. I mean, if one was a European and wanted to come to the United States, I would hardly recommend Santa Barbara County, because there's just so many different areas here that are so beautiful.
For sure.
And the other thing that I found really interesting photographing is, I would go into the vineyard and I would be taking notes, and I'd say, what varietal of grape is this? And discovered that there were over 60 varietals, 60 different grapes that are commercially grown in Santa Barbara County. And you think of Napa or the Willamette Valley or something, you're thinking about one or two varietals, 3. Here, there's 60, and it's just amazing. And to go from the coast inland, you're changing temperature. Richard Sanford famously said, the temperature rises a degree every mile you travel.
Right. Now, you mentioned, the beauty of the clouds, and I totally agree. But we don't have those boring blue skies. Like, don't tell the Chamber of Commerce that. Darn those blue skies. But I'm with you a zillion %. I mean, when the clouds are around, it feels like a completely different world up here. And so that would be something a little bit unique to the time frame during which you elected to create this work. Along those same lines, it made me think, were there moments, and this is for both of you, were there like parts of interviews or moments, like just like one or two during the course of this that really struck you? You know what I mean? Like when you're like maybe taking a photo and you're like, oh my gosh, like you have that feeling. Or Matt, if you're interviewing someone and they share something really intimate or cool. Did that happen during the book?
I mean, for me, it happens quite a bit in covering wine beyond this region. And that's one reason I got interested in wine. It wasn't just because I like drinking wine. It was because wine is this connection to the past. It's a connection to, other parts of the world. It's a language that kind of everyone can speak. And also, in a selfish way, covering the Central Coast, especially for Wine Enthusiast magazine, allows me to go down any dead end road I'd like to see some vineyard at the end. And I love going down dead end roads that have vineyards at the end. So there were numerous times when we were at a site meeting someone, and you're just like, wow, this is a stunning part of California that not a lot of people get to see. And we're right here on the front lines of it. But I'll say, like, I get to do that all the time as part of my job. So it wasn't just related to this book, but it is a motivation for why I cover this at all. Mm-hmm. As far as like inspiration, I mean, there's always, hearing people's stories is always really inspirational to me. I mean, even Greg, hearing your story about, you were raised more or less by your mom in LA, who was putting herself through law school. And then you fell in love with France for no apparent reason other than like a high school teacher or something that really inspired you. And then you come to Paris and you remember flying in. It was like this almost epiphany day. I mean, those stories are really interesting to me. And And I hope we convey them in a way that really respects the truth of them and the spirit of them. And we ran into that a lot. I mean, Michael Seguin from Kaena, Hawaii Mike, like, he has these crazy stories about his grandmother and like kind of the spirit flowing through everything and how he made all these decisions and how he really believes like certain things happen for certain reasons. You hear that a number of times, and you have to start to believe that there's some truth to that magic there. So that kind of stuff is why I'm in this business at all. I mean, it happened quite a bit during the creation of the book, I'd say.
Awesome. And I think that's why, and I want to go to you, MacDuff, in just a sec, but I think that's why I meant that with the utmost sincerity, because I know a lot of these players as well, obviously, but reading through, and it's a testament to both of you and how sensitive you are to people, how much we all trust and love you. But it's almost like diary entry. I mean, it's really a personal thing. I mean, you're reading these like stories about people. I mean, it really does read like, for me anyway, like a short story kind of thing. You're like, oh, wow, I didn't know that about so-and-so, or I didn't know they came into it that way. It's really just, unfolding that way is so beautiful. It's not just like, oh, they make this and they do that and they use barrels or whatever. It's all, the personal thing is really engaging. And I think
there's not a lot of, I mean, for being a wine book, there's not a lot about wine.
No, and that's why I think it'll be such a beautiful thing for so many different people to enjoy. You know what I mean? Because sometimes specific wine books, they are what they are. But I think, for the, everyone in attendance tonight, listening in, for those that, flipping through, gift giving, whatever, it's so much more than a wine book. Besides the beauty and everything else, I really think that it's so expansive that way because of its intimacy. I think it's beautiful. So MacDuff, I don't want to snow over you. So the photo thing, were there like moments? I mean, this area can be so epic, sunrise, sunset, where there's like a few times when you're like, wow, this is epic.
Absolutely. I mean, there was one time I had a lunch with Jim Clendenin. I was photographing for the.
And do you remember?
Yeah, exactly.
And he brought out a bunch of library wines from Burgundy, from Santa Barbara County, just this insane selection. And of course, we all had a sip. And I drive out and the sky is absolutely glorious. And there's a storm that's passing through and it's on the Bien Nacido vineyard area. And so I ran over and said, can I get the clicker to get through, to get up to Block Z to shoot? And I was hoping Chris was there or whatever, but the woman, she said, you know where you're going? And I said, yes. And I'm in a hurry. And she gave me the clicker and I ran up there and I had like 3 or 4 minutes to shoot. And that's the cover and the back cover. And,
wow.
And the images that are in there. And it didn't last. It was one of the storms that just completely blew through. And you have to be in a place, and if you don't have your camera, if you're not there, you don't record it. But on another note, like Michael, who we're talking about, he's from Hawaii. And he was talking about Hawaii, and I said, my brother-in-law is Cecilio and Capono. And he said, no way, bro. It was like, so immediately, yes, it was, and those sort of things happen all the time. I mean, when I was in the vineyards at night when people were picking, you'd have all these crews speaking Spanish, and if they had a transistor radio, they would be playing. If they didn't, somebody would start singing, and someone would look to me and sort of like, do you understand what's going on? And I said, do you have any Julio Jaramillo? And it would blow them away. It's like, you know who Julio Jaramillo is? And it's like, and then I would, I would sing with them sometimes. As so it was, for me, a lot of this was about the human connection, because the work that I was doing down in Yucatan was visual anthropological work. And so sometimes people will say, well, you're working on a wine book, isn't that kind of frou-frou or something? And it's like, no, this book is, and that's one of the delights of working with Matt, is that we're dealing with social issues, we're dealing with global warming and sustainability. Santa Barbara County perhaps has more women winemakers than any other wine area. So there's all these things that are global issues, and it's right here in our backyard. And it's like, this is important.
For sure.
And working with Matt, it's like, are we going to mention this? And he said, hell yes, let's do it.
Yeah, cool. And that I want to touch on that, because that's really, I love how those are kind of inserted within the book, like those, and someone in the Q&A, asked about how, sequentially how the book was laid out. And I think, and so, the alphabetical thing makes great sense. And it's also cool that for me anyway, that it wasn't just chronological, because it keeps it more diverse, I think. Being alphabetical, it's a little more of like a grab bag in some ways. But then, when you did insert the women winemaker section, or, the different kind of, not interludes, but you know what I mean, those like little intermissions. How was that determined? Was it just ideas that you felt were really important and timely, and then the like where and kind of the sequence of those? What was the rationale behind that?
I mean, to some extent, it might be hard to go back and figure out how we did it. Now it just seems like, how else would you do it? I mean, obviously we start with the introduction. That's fairly obvious. And Richard Sanford wrote a lovely foreword for us. Then we have the introduction. Then we kind of tell the history, right? Because that seems important. Then geography needs to be there. Then we kind of dive into, the profiles. But then we were like simultaneously reporting these we call them like trend chapters, right? So it just felt like the book, based on other wine books I've read recently. I mean, Raj Par's Atlas recently was a good example, I think, where it kind of had a slightly similar thing, where there were kind of producer profiles interspersed with these kind of slightly other ideas. And so I just felt like it needed something like that in there, and that was an easy way to do it. We ended up having about like 5 trends, because we have the women winemakers, we have sustainability, we have home winemakers. That was something we really wanted to tell too, a fairly large chapter on home winemakers, because it's a long time tradition here, going back to the 5th. I mean, really going back to before the commercial industry here.
Sure.
And so we wanted to get that in there. And then we have this whole other chapter called El Buen Equipo, which is, the good team. This was MacDuff's idea. As he was alluding to, he was really connecting with all of the farm crews, and he speaks not only fluent Spanish, but he knows all the slang in Spanish and everything like that. So he could really connect with them on a very direct level. And then he started taking a black backdrop out, taking their pictures, and then he'd bring them back their printed out pictures, so that he became like a celebrity. He'd show up and they'd be like, oh, the photographer's here. And so there's this whole chapter in the book, which looks like kind of a yearbook. And it's at the end, because we didn't really know where else to put it. It was too big of its own chapter to be somewhere else. But it's pictures of all of the people and types of people that are required to take a vintage to market. So that includes everyone from, the farmers who are pruning things. And then you have, all the way up to like wealthy proprietors and marketing people, and then vineyard managers and all this sort of stuff. And that was actually the essay there MacDuff wrote, because he wrote about, the story of connecting with them and learning their stories. And so that's kind of, and then, and looking back, it's like, how did we organize it? Well, I'm not sure which other way you could have done it. You could have stacked all those trend chapters together, but there's no value there. So
yeah, and it would have, I don't know, I think it keeps the book so much more lively, I think, because it's like, chapters in a book, or scenes in a movie or a musical score or something. It keeps you so much more engaged, because you kind of, you kind of don't know what's going to come next, and there's something really beautiful about that. And speaking of personal connections between the two of you, is there something that you kind of learned about the other, or, maybe, I'm sure you learned something, about the other, what like throughout this process that surprised you, or kind of a deeper understanding of the other? Anything stand out between the two of you?
You go first, MacDuff.
Matt is incredibly easy to work with. And he's, and one of the things I learned was that in undergraduate school, you were an anthro major, right?
Yeah.
And one of his first stories was to go down and work with Annabelle Ford in Belize, who is someone who I worked with for years on my Maya book. And so there was, I think there's an empathy that you get working in anthropology and archaeology, that you, first of all, you realize that there are other cultures, and the belly button of the world isn't necessarily in your city or.
Right.
And so Matt had traveled and had that experience of the other. And it made it much easier to talk about these, a lot of things. And although we're talking about winemaking in Santa Barbara County, I think our take on this was very much a worldview of looking at this, both from a sociological and an ethnographic point of view, that this was an important area to document. And in that sense, this book is it's just a moment in time of Santa Barbara County. It's like a time capsule.
Yeah, it's so beautiful you said that, because it's actually, I was kind of going there anyway in my thought. And the question is kind of born out of that. So, in a lot of European kind of wine cultures, I would suspect it's a little more static as far as, this domain, and, the son or daughter will take over that domain, and they don't really have a choice, and that's what happens. And just because we're in the US, the things I know kind of, and certainly see, and I think even during the course of the book, there might have been a little shifting around with different wineries, staffing, personnel, whatever. Was that frustrating, or were you content with kind of capturing, and not like it's a snapshot, you know what I mean, but capturing like this period in time? Was that, how did you grapple with that, if you will?
It was something that we had to realize early on and openly acknowledge, both internally for ourselves and as a talking point when explaining to people, because this would come up during the process, like, oh, this is going to change, and we had to be comfortable with it being a time capsule at some point, right? I will say, we were editing this stuff pretty much up until September of this year, so it's pretty up to date. But yeah, in the course of it, not only were there personnel changes, people died,
Yeah.
that we had covered, and so that was heavy. And but I think we tried to do, we tried to be as up to date as possible. But I don't know if it was, I think it was MacDuff that figured out. He's like, we have to think of this as like a time capsule. It's a snapshot. It's not, you can't tell a fluid story in a printed form perfectly because it's going to change. But I think we got it I mean, what I've said in a lot of the like marketing materials and other interviews is, we're trying to capture what I think is one of the most exciting wine regions in the world. And I think that's not just my opinion and my bias, but like, I think that's like as much as you could quantify that, I think you could probably make a strong argument for that about Santa Barbara County. And it's one of the most critical times in this wine region's existence. There's just, we have pioneers now that are established, that are starting to get older and move on themselves. And so what's going to happen next? And we were able to capture those people, still kind of at their apex. There were tragedies involved. There were, business failures. And so, we have all that in there. So I think we were able to do it, but certainly it was, for me too, I'm a journalist, so I work at a newspaper, so I can write a new story all the time. So it's hard to kind of set it in stone in a book. But really kind of coming to grips with the fact that it was a snapshot was really helpful, to move forward and adjust when needed.
Right. And I think and then from the imagery thing, I was about to kind of hand the same question over to you, MacDuff, and I would imagine that it's a little bit different in that, you know, the images are the images. I mean, you know, it's the landscape is the landscape, kind of, or am I wrong as far as changing over time?
Well, yeah, there's in the Richard Sanford introduction, there's a picture of the Santa Rita Hills with a vineyard, and it's autumnal. That vineyard isn't there. It got ripped out, you know, like a week after I shot that picture. So that's just, you think in
MacDuff.
you think in geological time, and you're talking about millions of years, but in vineyards, there's another example, the Pence, they pulled out the opening shot of the Pence chapter. You have all these vineyards in front. Well, they pulled that out. You can't go back. So things were changing. I mean, people are planning. They're constantly, there's some disease, so something might get pulled out because of that, or they decide that they don't want one varietal, they want another varietal. So either they are pulling it out, or they're bringing in, and the things were changing all the time.
Yeah. Cool, interesting. So even that is fluid. And Matt, you touched on something just now in your last response, as far as this interesting point now where, you know, the true pioneers who started everything essentially post-prohibition, of course, are still predominantly still in the game and active and going after it. And some are kind of at that point where they're looking to move on, you know, because it's been a 50-year pull of doing something. Or how do you see, both of you, because you've been here for so long and you're so, you know, you went so deep with everybody so recently, like, you know, comprehensively around, you know, across the board. What do you see for Santa Barbara County in the next 10, 20 years? Any kind of, just in general?
I mean, I think the COVID aside, which is obviously a troubling situation that has put a lot of things to the forefront of every industry, right? The wine industry at large is in a really weird place right now. It's gone through periods of you know, bigger companies buying smaller companies. There's just so many wineries out there right now, not just in Santa Barbara County. Santa Barbara County has a seemingly kind of like a manageable number. But if you look at the Central Coast or California or even the country, like there's just so much competition out there right now. So much competition for attention, for sales, for everything, that there's going to be some sort of shakedown, I think, in the years to come. And in the past, there seemed to be kind of more clear paths to exiting, right? So you could sell to a bigger company, and that happens. I mean, Greg, you were able to sell a lot of your shares to Jackson Family, but it's not happening that much anymore, because I think these bigger companies are also like, wait a minute, let's slow our roll a little bit, you know. And so you look at people here. I mean, you look at like a Jim Clendenin, Aubin Clement. I mean, his kids are showing some interest, so there might be kind of a move there. That's what you would like to see. That's what you see happen in Europe. That's why there's a strong tradition there. But a lot of kids who watch their parents grow up in the wine business are like, I don't want anything to do with that. You worked all the time. And so what are the exits for some of these, you know, really important brands if their kids aren't interested, if they don't have successors? Like, what is the succession plan? And I don't really know the answer to that. It's interesting to see as a journalist, but it's also like as a friend and colleague of these people, it's also kind of like you're just kind of waiting to hear what happens the whole time, you know?
Right.
So I don't know. It's interesting. I've actually thought about writing just a book that would be about kind of the lions and winter of Central Coast wine, you know, and how their outcomes, what they're planning, what they're not planning, how their outcomes have changed. Some people have gotten really kind of, you know, screwed out of their, I mean, Bob Lindquist from Coupe talks very openly about how he was kind of cut out of this brand that he created and grew into a global force. And so, I don't know how it's going to go. As a journalist, it'll make for interesting writing and reading, but I'm also like kind of holding my breath a little bit too to see how it goes. And then you have competition to some extent from cannabis. You have competition from other regions that maybe do a better job of marketing themselves in the marketplace. There's a lot going on right now, and we make, like I openly say, we make, I think the best wine consistently out of anywhere in California, but that doesn't matter really all the time. The great quality doesn't necessarily mean you win. There's a lot more. There's a lot more to play when it comes to the game of wine competition, and we get into a little bit of that in the book, but it's really kind of more, we captured it at this nice time. So now we'll see. We'll look back in 10 years and go like, how did all these people turn out?
It's getting hot in here, Ketman. Yeah. I'm gonna go put my tea down and take a shot of whiskey and yeah, make the tanks a little colder. How about and for you, MacDuff, like what do you see? It's kind of a different type of question, but not really. I mean, you're how do you see the area in the next couple, like in the next generation?
I don't know. I mean, one of the things that I think, one of the qualities of Santa Barbara County that is so charming is so many of these wineries are family owned. They're not corporate. And as Matt says, how long will that continue? Or will Santa Barbara County be able to continue that, this tradition? I think Santa Barbara County has a difficult time selling itself because someone says, well, obviously we're going to promote Pinot Noir from Santa Rita Hills. And then somebody in Ballard Canyon says, what do you mean? It should be Syrah. And somebody in Happy Canyon says, what do you mean? It should be Cabernet. And to an extent, that's, I think, been very helpful to Santa Barbara keeping this low profile and having, Santa Barbara County is a charming place, and I hope it retains that. I hope in 10 or 20 years that hasn't changed, that we don't have these sort of McMansion wineries and tasting rooms that it's the tasting rooms, for example, in Santa Barbara County, they just feel like you can walk in and they're familial, they're approachable, and you don't feel like you need a Jaguar to drive up the driveway, or you have to show your gold American Express card or something in order to gain entry. And almost everybody that I've met, they're just really friendly.
Yeah.
And one of the things about this book, one of the chapters in it is a year in the life of a vineyard. And several people said, God, this answers all the questions that people, it's like, go ahead and do your tasting, but read this chapter.
No, for sure. And I think, as we're kind of nearing the end, and I want to, see if there's any other kind of questions or anything else you want to add to kind of like put a bow on this. But you touched on something, MacDuff, which is interesting, and you touched on it earlier tonight and then just now. And it's something I've always seen as kind of a blessing and a curse is a little too extreme, but the diversity in the area sometimes can pose some challenges on, especially, kind of far away marketing, right? When someone asks like, what's Santa Barbara all about? And it's like, well, it's sometimes hard to really just drill down and give them like a good, solid, succinct.
Do you have 10 minutes?
Yeah. And so, and with that said, so while that can be something of an impediment, if you will, from that marketing kind of, mono tight little message, it does make, as you said, for a very diverse kind of county. And I can't stress it enough for everyone who's watching is this too. I mean, it's so cool because the county is so diverse, and I think again, if we only had a varietal or two, which would be awesome in a lot of ways, this book would not be as rich and diverse as it ultimately is. And so the fact that, you know, you've captured all of that in this is really beautiful. It's such a gift to all of us, as is your time tonight. So thank you both for being so kind of candid and honest, and it was fun. And again, to Chaucer's, there was a question about, like, you know, where to find the book. Of course, Chaucer's in Santa Barbara is a wonderful spot. A lot of tasting rooms locally are selling the book. And so that's another great way, you know, you can, when you're out tasting, right now, obviously, you know, we all know it's, you know, a little dodgy, but, you know, in the weeks to come, things will, you know, in the weeks and months to come, that will be easier again. Please come back and visit. We'd all love to host you. And most of us do have the book as well. So you can go wine tasting and pick up a copy along the way. And of course, Chaucer's is an amazing venue, as always, for this book and many others. And that's it. Anything you want to add, or?
Well, if you go to, I put a list of Chaucer's is on it, some other retailers and wineries where you can find the book too, on our website, which is vinesandvisionsb.com. We were selling directly there. We still are, but we're frankly almost out of copies on our end, so we're probably gonna have to stop selling there. And
got a few more here.
Yeah,
I'm gonna play the secondary market. Like $200 each. So anyway, so thank you, Mike. Thanks for allowing me the privilege of hosting this. It was really, really, really special. Matt, thanks for the shout out to Mom. I think Mom's watching tonight, so the fact you referenced her, huge brownie points for me. So yeah, I got your back on that. That was really sweet. Thanks for that. And Mike, back to you.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Please again at chaucersbooks.com, but Matt Kettmann, MacDuff Everton, Greg Brewer, this is probably the most magical night out of all the virtual events we did. You guys were excellent. So I thank the three of you and I wish you all the best of success. Matt, I'm sorry I misspoke your magazine. It's Wine Enthusiast. But anyway,
I'll take whatever I can get. Yeah.
I wrote for Wine Spectator for about 8 or 9 years too, so it's okay.
I blame Greg Brewer on that because of his, was so wonderful. So thank you everyone and have a nice evening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Greg.